Welcome back to Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. Today, we are talking about The Price You Pay for College by Ron Lieber. We've had a couple of great segments talking about part one of the book and part two of the book, a lot of the different emotions that are connected to this college process. We wanted to acknowledge this part five, which is really getting down to brass tacks and actually starting to come up with a plan for how you're going to approach the different financial aspects of college. And what I loved about this, Gene, is I heard so much of my colleagues from the finance team here at College Coach in the advice here about communication, both with students and parents, but also with financial aid offices. How much did you love this part of the book and the way that he was championing the same things that you talk about all the time?
I was just, throughout the book, I would say, oh, yes, agreeing, because he does say so much of what we say and promote, that I thought it was just really, really spot on. He did a great job with that. So, yeah.
Awesome. That's great. Sally, we don't often know what we're talking about on the admission side. We're kind of like, to talk to Gene.
Yeah, exactly. When it comes to finance questions, I'm like, I am happy to set up, put you in touch with our paying for college team. Yeah.
But were there some things in this section that you thought, oh, that's great. I actually like that piece of it, or are there elements of the financial conversation that you might bring into your practice with counseling students now that you're more aware of it from his perspective?
I mean, I think, in all honesty, I don't think there's anything new I would bring in, but I might be able to bring in some language. Like, I really want to go back through and read over it again. But maybe because I have been listening to, we've been doing the radio show, I've been listening to my finance colleagues, and so I have actually gently talked to people and said, have you thought about a community college, or let's talk about an honors college? And here are some of the questions that you ask. Actually, one of the things that I realized with my experience at Bright Horizons College Coach is that when I tell people, I think this might be the right path for you, they don't always like it. Like, I can do that when it comes to these are the best classes to take. But when I instead say, here are some questions for you to consider, that tends to go over much better. And so that's exactly what he did. And that it was just good to have it reinforced. I don't mean to sound like I think I had it all going on, but I have been doing this since 92. So
yeah, we're not going to do the quick math on that. So but I think you're right. I think that having questions to ask is just such a great asset when you go visit a college, when you're talking to somebody, just sending an email to a financial aid office, knowing what kind of stuff you're looking for is so helpful. And he does a good job of centering the student and really thinking about how to navigate that conversation for the student. I also really loved, again, as a parent of kids who have college in their future, I really loved the way that he helped to structure a conversation with grandparents, not to say, hey, give me all your money, but if there's a plan to help send my kids to college, I'd love to know that you have one. If not, that's great. I can totally confidently find my way through this process, but I'd just like to know. And I think that he basically has this, the action steps for how to have a conversation with your parents about paying for your kids' college, I think was really, really awesome. And I talked with my wife about that just this morning. I was like, this was great. I thought this was a really terrific set of steps. I also, one thing that actually, he talked about US News and World Report, and he was sufficiently negative about rankings in a way that satisfied me. But he also made a great point that it has allowed a lot of data gathering that otherwise would not have happened. And so you can actually use the data from the US News and World Report rankings to figure out which colleges have the kinds of features that are going to matter to you. You don't have to use the ranking itself as your driver, but you can definitely use their homework to figure out what schools are going to be a good fit for you. So that was a great reminder that there can be some good that comes from those ranking systems as well.
And I will say too that with his last chapter, One More Feeling Hope, he said, why not treat the process of trying to beat the odds as a fun family project? Like, I think this is going to be very challenging for people, but I will say that I've had students who were able to do that.
Yeah.
One young man in particular applied to, and I still wouldn't advise this. He applied to tons of schools that he really probably wasn't getting into. And so I just kind of had a blunt conversation with him about, how are you going to feel if you don't get in? And he's like, that's fine. Like, and it was fine. Like, he didn't get into most of these schools. And he's like, I wanted to see what was going to happen. And he ended up going to NYU. He was thrilled with it, or actually no, Boston College, totally thrilled. And for him, it was kind of a project. He was like a future business major, and he looked at things in a kind of analytical way, like, how can I maximize opportunities? And
That's
cool.
cool.
In all honesty, he should have listened to me a little more, because he wasn't really maximizing opportunities applying to some of the schools where he'd hired an expert. Maybe maximize your opportunity by listening to your expert. But, like, he was able to look at it as that project. And as a result, I think he felt like it had been a success. He found out about the process. He learned about it. He learned about where he was, kind of what his level was. And he seemed fine with all of it. It was kind of a fascinating experience for me. I will say, though, that I think it was the only time I've seen a student do that really successfully.
Applying broadly to many schools.
Yeah, and having it be successful. Most of the students, when they've kind of successfully looked at it as a project, have actually really culled their list down early on and had really honest conversations with me, with their family, about what was going to be possible financially, academically, etc.
That's my experience too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Jean, any other things that you saw in this final section? I want to get to just our big takeaways or any other things that we might have missed, but were there other pieces of advice that you would want to call particular attention to for families?
I think, again, that conversation with your children starting early, having that honest conversation about what everyone's expectation is, to try to keep the stress level down, to, as Sally said, do some research, make it a fun family project. It doesn't have to be stressful and annoying. I tell people, if you're on vacation and you're somewhere and you see a college, drive off, walk around, see what your feel is for that school.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. Thinking about what you can afford is important. Thinking about what your student's future career is. Just before this session, I answered a help desk question from a family who is looking for student loans, says they can't afford to they can't afford to pay, and yet they're looking for all these loans. And I would really love to talk to them about, like, let's look and see what other options your student has available to them before you get yourself or your student in too deep. Like Sally said earlier, it's really sad when you see someone borrowing $100,000 for school, and maybe no means to repay that.
Yeah. That being said, I really want everybody to read part 3, Value Things Worth Paying For.
So good.
I try to articulate that to people, and it's challenging to get it all across in short phone calls. I'm more successful in the retail calls, but classrooms, this isn't just about a pretty campus, right? It's like, what are these colleges going to give your students beyond sort of the obvious things that you've thought about it? Please get this book and read part 3, and then really try and think honestly about what you need to get the experience that you actually are looking for. I just thought this was such a good section and so helpful.
And also,
I was just going to say that one thing that I wish this book had is like a companion worksheet of some kind after each section. They're like, here are the questions that you might ask, and just tying that back to that trio of possible motivations for going to college. I mean, it's in there, it's in the pros, and you can pull it out, but it would be really cool if there was a kind of a workbook that families could use as well to help support that. Jean, go ahead. I'm sorry I interrupted.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. The other thing he did talk about was, if your student has differing learning styles, and if your student has mental health issues, how is the school going to be able to address those? He was most surprised by, or he said he asked college presidents what they were most surprised by in their incoming classes. And they said the amount of students that are coming in on anxiety meds and that need services. And so if your student needs those, make sure they have them, whatever his or her learning disability is, make sure they can address that. Because those things don't magically go away once you go to college. In fact, sometimes they get a little worse. I think students fail to self-identify with, learning differences. They want to give it that old college try and try to do it themselves. So, understanding what those kinds of things, if your child has an ongoing medical condition, you might not want to be 50 miles from a major medical center. If your kid is, 500 miles from home, you're going to want to know that medical care is nearby. So those kinds of things are really important. I think in determining what's going to be a good fit for your child.
Yeah, one of the things we talked about on the break between segments was also mentoring, just having such a prominent place in this book, how he repeatedly came back to this idea of whether it's a faculty member or a staff member, having a close relationship with an adult in your college years is such a value. And it's something that I don't think a lot of people really think about when they're investigating colleges, or they don't necessarily think about the structures of a college as leading to that. Sally and we both went to Reed. We got to write senior theses where we were working one-on-one with a faculty member for an entire year. There are lots of other examples. Was it a whole chapter on dinner at a faculty member's house and how important that happened to us at, all the time in school. And it was amazing. He said, students think this is such a special thing to get to go over to a professor's house for dinner. And I remember that feeling when I was a student. It's like, this is the coolest. What an awesome experience. And how much more likely that is at smaller institutions than larger institutions.
The other thing too, I want to throw in quickly, a project that lasts at least a semester. Students, you may not think that a senior thesis is a fun thing to do, but boy, do you learn from it. Boy, does it end up being important.
Yeah. And his example of the College of Worcester was just amazing. A tiny little school that I had heard of, obviously, but just that whole senior project that they had to do and how enthusiastic everyone was to share the information. I was excited. I was like, where do I sign up?
He really likes the College of Worcester is the impression I got throughout this.
I think it's pretty cool myself. So I was down.
There's a lot to like there. Well, I don't know that we are ever going to have a conversation about a book that we don't really like, because we're not going to give free promotion to somebody who's wrong about this process. So far, we are 2 for 2 when we've undertaken these little reading projects as a team. We hope that you all have enjoyed them as well. Pick up the book, read along, have an opportunity to check it out. It's really fun to get to have these conversations. Any parting words of wisdom for our listeners before we close up for today?
Just read the book.
Read the book.
Read the
do
book.
Your research.
Do your research.
Always ask questions.
Do your research. I love it. All right. Well, that does it for this week. Next week, I'll be hosting once again. We'll be back here to talk about regular decision results, how to decide. Make sure you look at those financial aid packages and discount rates and what to do when you're waitlisted. We'll also enter into some listener questions. So you can always send us questions at gettingin.collegecoach@gmail.com. Is that right, Sally?
I think so. I just send them to Facebook.
Go to Facebook and ask us some questions.
And ask us questions there. Instagram.
They'll get to us. Yeah. Feel free to do that.
Check out our blog.
And check out our blog. There's
great stuff.
It's good to have another host here on standby. I need that sometimes. All right. Well, we had a fun time reading this and discussing it. Hope you all enjoyed the show as well. We will see you all back here next week. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.